before I turn this over to our presenters this evening, I'm with Bill Walker here, who sometimes is behind the scenes, and tonight we decided we'd both be in front of the computer right here. He'll be fielding questions at the end. And I want to thank you for taking time out this evening. This will be recorded so you can watch it again. I have a couple of my own things I want to present in case you're going to be in Palm Springs. Good image here. If you're going to be in Palm Springs in the next couple of weeks for the Modernism Week, we will also be there with a museum exhibit called Dining on Modernism. And I hope you'll stop in at the convention center and say hello to us. Also, for people who have renewed their memberships or need to renew their membership, the new menu is going to be in the mail in the next few weeks, and it features a lovely cover with some TEPCO ware on it and lots of good information and images for you who like to hold things in your hand. This is not available online. It's only available in print for any of you that want it. And what have I forgotten, Bill? Nothing. So we're going to go ahead. Before we start tonight, I want to mention you should all tune in a month from now on March 8th. Rolf Achilles, who's in the audience tonight, is going to be presenting. And just to get his topic correctly identified, it's called Degenerate Dinnerware, Shape and Decoration. I'll let you go to our website, and if you're attending tonight, you're going to get a notification about it. But trust me, you won't, with beautiful, beautiful ceramics, and you will not want to miss this. If you like Art Deco, you'll love this even more. And so this evening, without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers and hold up two things before I do that. One is this wonderful, very heavy book that Chotsani Elaine Dean and Donald Clark have put together and are going to speak with us tonight about contemporary Black American ceramic artists. And this is one heck of a book. It's absolutely beautiful. Incredible illustrations. Schiffer Publishing did it, and kudos to them for welcoming this important topic. The other thing I want to show, and I'm probably going to stand up here to show this properly with my camera on the computer. This is a piece in our, get this right. This is a piece in our permanent collection by one of the people that they will be presenting about tonight, David McDonald. And it was for our Butter show. He was one of the invited artists for that exhibition a couple of years ago. So Chotsani Elaine Dean, who is affiliated with and teaches at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and Donald Clark, who you might know from Farron Gallery, or you might know from the Marx Project. They are our presenters this evening, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to both of them. So welcome to Chotsani and Donald.
Good evening. Should we turn our cameras on now?
Yes, you should.
Okay.
Nice to see you again. Is Donald there?
He's here. I think his connection is a little slower.
Okay.
I'll fill in some of the space and say good evening to everyone, and thank you for being here. It's lovely to see a lot of screens and people.
There I am.
Hi.
Okay, hi, Donald. Okay, take it away, you two. Looking forward to this.
So am I,
Oh,
and I
right.
know Chotsani is too.
I'm gonna just get the screen share.
If she's a teacher, she knows how to do that.
2 years in a pandemic, lots of practice.
So you're
Oh,
seeing here the cover of the book that Margaret just showed you. The work you're seeing is by Morel Doucet, who will not be spoken about tonight because he's one of the many sculptors who are in this book. You're going to hear about a small fraction of the people whose work is in the book. The other housekeeping thing I would just like to share is that Margaret and Matt are in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Chotsani is in Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I am on a little island in the Southern Caribbean, which is how Chotsani and I actually put this book together. We did not meet face to face until we had sent the book to be edited. The other thing I wanted to, a gathering, which is on the right, is the cover of a catalog that the Northern Clay Center did for a fabulous show they did in the gallery as a launch for the book. It includes the work of nearly all the people who are in the book. It will travel to 2 more museums, one in Sacramento and another in Springfield, Massachusetts. You can go to the Northern Clay Center website, and in their past exhibitions, you can see a virtual tour of that exhibition, where you will see work that you are not going to see by artists you're going to see tonight, but different work than you are going to see. In the last piece is that before you see the artist's work, you're going to see their faces. It was very important to us when we put this book together for the readers of the book to see who they were reading about and whose work they were looking at. So we've used that format tonight. We're going to be speaking quickly about one person from a gathering then, which is the first section of the book. The majority of the people we're going to be speaking about are from the second section, which is a gathering now.
Yes.
How'd I do, Chotsani?
You did very well. I just want to let everyone know, because this is Zoom, even though we should be very well practiced with this distance relationship we have, we can't connect with each other the same way on this Zoom format. So I'm doing a lot of the technical and making sure we keep on track on time. We talked with each other and did a couple of run-throughs. We're going to keep it very conversational as we go back and forth, but we want to be super mindful to have some time for Q&A or reflection at the end of our presentation. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get us to Doyle Lane, who Donald Clark loves. So I just want to put that out there. And you'll learn why he loves him.
I do.
And his work too.
Doyle Lane's work was what motivated the early thoughts about this book. And it's a long story. Briefly, I saw his work in a collection on Deer Island, Maine, was even more fascinated to learn that he was a Black man who was hard to know anything about. He was born in New Orleans, spent his life in California, struggled to get his work into galleries, was repeatedly told they weren't taking work from Black people. He finally made a relationship with an architect who threw him a lot of work. One of the major remaining examples of this is a tile wall that's at the Huntington Gardens and Library. It was moved there from the bank where it had originally been installed. It's fabulous that it has been preserved.
Can you talk a little bit about the Marx Project and your encounter with Doyle Lane, which is not really in the book, but.
Well, that's how so I had already written about Doyle Lane for a little profile for the Marx Project, and was really, really hard to find anything about him. I did find that he had been in Objects USA, the catalog for that amazing show that Johnson Wax facilitated. But then I was determined to learn more about him, and realized that there were no doubt hundreds of other people who were under-recognized, underrepresented because of their race. So it was off to the races. And it was pretty great when Chotsani came on board.
Yeah, and got to learn about Larry Allen. And even for me, this was a learning experience. Coming up in Clay when I did, there wasn't a community as there is burgeoning now. And then especially with what the book project and the exhibition have done, bringing people together. I may not have seen Larry Allen's work, who you see here, because he normally has his work on a lot of festival circuits and fairs and such. So to see his work in person from the images was really surprising. The work is much larger than you get from the image. And so that just reiterates why it was really important to have an exhibition. We just could never leave well enough alone at the end of some of our conversations and writings. And editing and, dreaming big. And so I'm so glad we got to have that opportunity to see this work in person. And Larry was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And similar to who I'll talk about in a little bit, Rich Brown, they both encountered a lot of struggle, as a lot of people do when they start working with clay and working on the wheel, but their persistence paid off. And I'll just read a little bit about what informs Larry's process. The forms he chooses to create are often drawn from Native American and continental African pieces. Before bisque firing, when the clay is leather hard, Allen applies slip that is gray, blue, and white. Then he begins to develop the surface decoration using the sgraffito technique, which involves scratching through the surface layer. So he's really developed, I think, something that is a signature glazing and layering process that he keeps in the mid-range cone 6 area. And I hope at some point I get to meet Larry Allen in person. And if you'll notice, those are kind of corn symbols that he's incorporated into the work, which shows some of the influence he's taking and really making the work his own. And when he talks about his overall production, he says, I tried to give each piece the attention it deserves because I realized that I don't like to cop out on a piece just because it's small. I like to pay attention to everything I'm doing and put in that time for each piece. So like I said, it was such a gift to be able to see his work in person. And Donald's going to talk about Christina Baptiste.
And here's Christina, who is one of the youngest people in this book. It was important to the two of us to include young people, people in the middle of their career, and older, very established people like David McDonald, for instance.
Well, she's not the youngest, but the youngest to clay.
Well, that's the other thing. There are several people you're going to hear about who came to clay very later in life. And she talks about how that made it easier for her to explore the materials. She's makes functional pots, but not as a production person. She appreciates repetition, and she says that sometimes the glory of it doesn't come until you've made the 100th one. After George Floyd was murdered, she did a series of protest cups. There are two on the left. One says "Rise Up," and the other one has a piece of the John Lewis quote, "Good trouble." Not only did she come to ceramics late, she is also one of the people in the book who has a day job that is not related to ceramics. She is a research librarian dealing with PhD candidates doing research for their dissertations.
And next we have Rich Brown. So I get to go back down to the South. Rich Brown is in Atlanta, Georgia. He immigrated to the United States from Jamaica with his parents, with his family when he was 3 years old. And similar to Christina that we just talked about, he is a newcomer to clay. He watched a YouTube video on wheel throwing a cup. And similar to Larry, he had a steep learning curve, but pushed through that, which I think attributes to their attention to detail and just the deep appreciation of the process, and maybe without even knowing it, how important what they're doing is in terms of carrying on the tradition, the studio powder tradition, not necessarily being on the front stage in galleries, but being connected to the practice. And he says that after watching a YouTube video and making a mug, he was on his way to being a potter. After moving to Georgia, he began working in a group pottery studio. There, he could watch others work and learn from their advice. At the outset, he says, I kept being defeated by the potter's wheel, but I wasn't going to give up in my blood. I wasn't going to give up. It's in my blood. I learned something new every day. And that's what I'm remarking on in terms of that commitment. Almost when I think of Tiger Woods, who says he doesn't play against the other players on the golf course, he plays against himself. And I think that's something so important when you're working in the studio, especially with clay. We found that Rich Brown is, what do they say? Still waters run deep. His profile is one of the shorter profiles, and we struggled with that. But we reached out to him again. And I think similar to Nathan Murray, who is a sculptor who we won't be talking about tonight, who also has a shorter profile, they're really interested in having the work speak for itself, which is also something really nice. There are some artists who have very complex research practices, but it's also enjoyable. Just if something's minimal doesn't mean it's less. It means it can keep you looking longer, which I really appreciate about Rich Brown's work. And I'll leave you with a quote from him. My work is more about people than pottery. I'd like to be remembered as a good man who makes pottery. I'm so into manifestation. I'm into people. I think about the people I'm making for.
And another quote from him, nothing leaves my studio without good intentions. And here you see a bowl and a stack of his mugs.
And it's important to note the bowl on the left was in the exhibition and sold within like a day or two. So it's already in somebody's collection. And this here is Danielle Carolack, who is in the area of Charlotte, North Carolina. And recently graduated, so she is one of our very, very youngest in both ways, by age and by coming to clay. And she is really informed by how she can take her relationship with clay, and she's very intentional about how she wants to bring that back into her community. A couple of notable things she's done at her very young age is that she worked within a prison program, teaching art courses, and through the YMCA, I believe, and I'm sorry, you all, I can't remember every single thing we wrote like 2 years ago. So if I get that wrong, I'm pretty sure it is the Y. But similar to Rich Brown and even Aaron Caldwell, who we won't be talking about this evening, they are very much connected to community and what they've learned and what they want to bring back to that community, and bringing more people, more Black people into clay and shifting and changing. And one thing that Danielle does is she does a sliding scale for her work. She wants it to be accessible. She wants it to be affordable. She's also a glaze tactician. You can see a little bit of Doyle Lane in Danielle, and that she likes to test her glazes a lot, work with different clay bodies. And as you can see here, working with earthenware and lusters were very new to her in this particular body of work. So Danielle is someone who is very community oriented and wants to give back. So she's a profile I would definitely encourage you all to really sink into and see some positivity, even though a lot of that comes out of sort of what she's seeing happening in the world in a negative way. She may not see it now, but I see her as shifting and being positive. Carolock describes herself as naturally diverse in my creative approach. The work I do, I consider activism to be part of something bigger than myself, to reach and teach in the community so that many in my community who may not have access to the creative process of clay and my work can have access.
Well, now how about this?
I know, Justin, he's just too
This, if you
cool.
can figure out what vowels to drop in, you will know that this is Justin Coleman. And we're not going to, can you make it go back, Chotsani?
Sure.
We're not, you now know what we're not going to see this evening one of his sculptures in the form of a rim from a car. He worked on those. One of his things, one of the ideas he's interested in is making the high low and making the low high. So here is a rim. On that rim, there are images of Louis Vuitton logos and other high-end products. Now here we have on the left, first of all, both of those forms are store-bought. He didn't make the forms, he made the surfaces. The one on the left, he calls blue and white melt. And he, obviously all of the people in this book, the work of all the people in this book is informed by the fact that they are Black. He said that, all of my work is informed by the fact that I am a Black man. The marks on the rim of the blue and white piece and in the sky of the landscape piece on the right are decals, transfers made from the soles of his Nike Air.
Jordan. Jordans.
No,
Right.
it's not Jordan. It's Michael
Oh, the Air Max?
Air Max one shoe. And he spoke about, and I know from my experiences, that sneakers are very important to Black men. And here he has used them to create the surfaces of these two pieces. You'll notice in the one on the left, there's a Louis Vuitton, there's a boombox, there's a pyramid. A lot of his imagery also comes from rap. He apparently, when he's working, listens to rap music all day. And we asked all the makers to send us an image of themselves to be used the way you're seeing it used tonight. And he sent this image of himself in front of that bright pink wall.
And that really sums up Justin. I mean,
Yeah.
that his personality, it's so interesting to see someone who wears the work they make, and the work they make is what they wear.
Well, and we got to actually spend time with him. He was one of the people who came to Minneapolis, as did Christina Battiste.
Yeah.
And it was fabulous to spend time with them. And Chotsani's absolutely right. I mean, that image, that is Justin Coleman.
And this is how we know we're through halfway point.
Oh, look who's
I
there.
know who it is. That, speaking of, it's so perfectly timed. This is Donald's last day in Minneapolis, and we decided to continue celebrating, as you can see, with our food and libation. And since it was important to Donald, I struggled with this. I am also included in the book. So we decided to put my piece in here, which is titled Plantation Sugar Jar for Chloe Spheres, 1750 through 1815. I make this series of sugar jars, recalling and sort of dealing with the tension between what the proximity of similar to Justin, the high end, the delectable, what we think of when we think of things imported, and in my ancestry, the conflicted, tense, exploitative relationship of that. So I'm trying to make this work where I can re-establish and re-give in those forms and remember. And people have asked me before, am I, the sugar jar can't function? That's not my responsibility to figure out how people would use it, because I have people who have taken them and used them, and that is important to me as well. And if they're not used, I think I'm okay with that too.
Well, and Chotsani, this particular one remembers someone.
Chloe Spheres.
Because?
Well, she worked on a plantation, it's from, and I purposefully do not tell all the information in spaces like this, because what I'm interested in doing is having people look into that information for themselves. When we think about shifting, and even as it's Black History Month, what can be frustrating about that is people think it's a time to observe the month. Black History Month is integral. There is a reason we do call it Black History Month, but there needs to be more participation in that. So as I was raised and had to learn to mitigate and mediate through these different spheres, and even still in academia, I'm expected to come knowing a certain amount of things, and I wouldn't dare ask if I didn't know. I wait and I go look it up, so I come back prepared. Well, I expect others to do the same thing in terms of prompting their curiosity and wondering who someone is. So that was a hint for everybody to go look up and see who Chloe Spheres is. And so then we have Michelle Roxana Ettrick, a studio potter, but also works for, teaches at University of Pennsylvania in, I'm forgetting the name of the town. Tyrant, is that how you say it? That's really terrible. But it's one of their satellite campuses. And she really loves teaching. I follow Michelle on Instagram, and she just has a good time with her students, and it's evident she loves teaching. And I think that's integral to her story. She came to ceramics later in life. She started out first being creative, making dolls, and finding that she could sell them online. And so when she went to community college, she really started to take classes in business. And as I wrote in talking with her, she butted heads with her professor. And in that tension, they realized art was where she needed to be. And we're glad to have her there. In the same way I love to remember, as she emigrated, like similar to Wrench Brown, from Panama and grew up in New York. And a lot of what you're seeing her illustrate are her childhood memories. And keeping that alive. I think they're fun, playful, but also similar to Danielle, she is reacting to the world that they are living in as Black women, and they do use their platform in the studio and on the surface of their pots to address that. Ettrick states, remembering back in the day, memories of childhood and the fun we had as children. We played with everyone. That is important to me. Ettrick wants her work to reach a broad audience, she says. No matter where you come from or what you go through, I want the viewer to connect with my drawings. I don't think of my work as political. I just want to be hopeful and get people to remember how fun life was as a child and how fun life can be. Now, I want to be clear, her childhood was not all kicks and giggles, but she's decided to amplify that. And that's something I really find compelling about her work, and it is popular. Her piece is sold in the exhibition as well. And this is a piece of hers on the left, especially that part of the quote I read. We used to play with everyone. The couple on the left is called Besties. And when she was younger, her best friend was white. And so this image is really important of these two different types of hair tying together, and her best friend, and what that relationship means to her, as she deals with the categorizations of who she is and who her friend is in the world. And just enjoy the image on the left of children having a good time, having a sweet summer snack in the hot city.
Now, this slide is slightly different than the ones you've already seen. There are 3 artists represented here. On the left, the Eugenes, who are this amazing couple who collaborate in numerous ways. Sometimes Winton makes the pot and Rosa decorates it. Sometimes Rosa makes the piece and Winton decorates it. They're production potters. They sell their work at craft shows throughout the Southeast. They are in Cowpens, South Carolina. They every year make one major piece, production piece, that they then use as the prototype for the rest of the pieces they make. I have a little quote that makes pretty clear to me the amazing way these two work. Rosa says, "I trust Winton with my ideas. The idea here was to show how and why women become head of household when the men were sold away. Slave owners, white and black, created the system for African-American women as the family matriarch." And you're going to see that bowl right there. On the right, Earlene Green, during a sabbatical, spent time researching the Hiram Wilson and Company pottery, which was founded by 5 freed Black brothers who ended up in Texas. We believe it was the first Black-owned business in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So this jar is a replica of their work. And their work had a label, as you see, minus a legacy revisited. Earlene added that to the pieces she makes. The other side of her work, which you can see in the book, is amazing, amazing sculptures. She has found a way to add intricate patterns to flat slabs of clay and then know the right moment to be able to drape them or hang them. And her work has very deep and important messages about the Black experience. And one of her pieces is, what's the woman's name, Chotsani?
Henrietta Lacks.
Henrietta Lack. And there is a book now about her experience and her family's experience after she passed.
Yep, and that piece is in the exhibition. Again, much larger in person than I perceived in the book.
Yeah, those 2 pieces are big.
Yes, they're big. Now, how do you, David McDonald? I mean, it almost seems redundant to introduce him, who does not know David McDonald. I remember I met David McDonald. I'm sure he does not remember me. I was the studio potter at Wesleyan Potters, and I just tiptoed around him because I was so intimidated and amazed. So I was very fortunate to see him make his platters in person and give a workshop. Donald and I, and we'll kind of do this together, really wanted a little more from Donald, and he just graced us with his time and had a phone conversation with us. And no, we didn't include everything from that conversation, but it just gave us a greater sense of his legacy from where he started and where he is today as professor emeritus at Syracuse. So I'll open up with a quote. He says, "At that time, I was an athlete," in his time in undergrad. "I enjoyed the physical nature of working in clay. I found it much more fulfilling than dabbing paint on a canvas. But that canvas is not lost in what we see on the surface of his forms, and especially his platters." Do you want to talk a little, Donald,
and
about his motifing?
First of all, in the image you just saw, he is holding a tool that he uses, that he invented or he built, that makes the incising on these pieces. The patterns are all based on patterns he saw painted on houses in Nigeria. So they're very true to his heritage. These are both functional pieces because that's what we're doing here. But in the book, you would see some amazing sculptural forms based again on West African objects.
So I think that reading a quote will do justice in this, and that he says, his advice to young people is that you shouldn't be doing this stuff with the hope and expectation that you will one day become famous. If that is your primary goal, you will try to figure out what shortcuts you can take to be famous, and you will compromise yourself in the process. Do it because you love it, and do it. And to do anything else is inconceivable. It should never be about what you need to know to be important or famous. The more important thing is what you have to do to tap into what is uniquely important in you. Once you find this out, then you have made it. Once you find it, just follow that. Unfortunately, it's not always easy. He makes it look easy though. And here we have Sharon Norwood. Unfortunately, Donald wasn't able to be in Minneapolis, but Sharon Norwood, along with Ashlyn Pope, who we'll talk about a little later, were able to come to Minneapolis. They did a discussion with each other about the Black body and clay and metaphor, because both of their works deal both directly and indirectly with the body. And in Sharon Norwood's case, it's all about the line, which was all inspired by hair. Curly hair, and then this relationship Black women have with their hair. So she just wanted to find some way to reconcile this, in history where she didn't see herself represented. Although similar to Fragonard's swing, she wants to imagine herself in those ways of being beautiful and centered. So you see in her work, she finds these Royal Albert and Ainsley, Staffordshire. When she came to town afterwards, we found out we both have a problem collecting certain objects from the past. Mine is depression glass and hers are these tea sets. And I collect some of these too. So she was immediately sending me links and I said, you are trouble. She's trying to get me to spend money I do not have. So for Norwood, the ongoing interchange between two-dimensional and three-dimensional processes is essential in what fuels her work, in which contour drawing plays a significant role in her practice. She says, the line has always inspired me in contour drawing, trusting the line, the mark, and the process. So she also talked about how she would find her hair everywhere too, and this curliness. And I think the way she makes the work universal is that we all have this relationship to hair. We can lose hair, we shave hair, we grow hair, we have hair in places we don't want it, etc. And for her, the hair overlapping these very fixed elements of refinement and upper class. I love how she's taking that apart and making some of that obscure and asking the question, you may be sipping tea, but what are you doing at the expense of this luxury, but then also you can enjoy it in the sense of what she's talking about. She comes out of a painting tradition into clay. And what's new about the work and the piece she put in the show is now the line has come off the surface of these forms and they are now existing in space. And she described that at the discussion as being very new for her, but also very freeing. They have a lot of luster on them. They're shiny and just moving all around and look different when you see them on the pedestal.
Well, and there is an image of one of
Yep.
those pieces,
Yep, just
in
kind
the
of
book.
a singular coil.
and
So
she's working much the same way as Justin Coleman in using transfers on repurposing
yeah, those
existing pieces.
yeah, though that hair you see on there, she drew all of that. And she's very meticulous about how she's layering, and she's firing multiple times to get the exact kind of relationship and composition on these pieces. Stephen Phillips, Donald.
Oh, look who's here.
I know.
Another one of our makers on the younger end of things. And I want to read a quote from him. The movie, my words first, the movie Black Panther was a major influence on Phillips. He recounts, the movie was full of African culture depicted in a way to show a different perspective of Black people. This was the first time for me seeing someone like me being in a large superhero movie. The richness in the creativity depicted throughout the movie was inspired and prompted me to start creating work with such a bold and yet eloquent appearance. And here you see two of his pieces. Stephen Phillips is also a very religious man, and the jar on the left has a cross on the top. He's also very interested in matte versus glazed areas on his pieces. He uses a very sophisticated resist method masking tape.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see this particularly clear on the piece on the left. His day job is in a steel fabricating plant where he sees all the leftover cut pieces. And I'm feeling like that's what I'm seeing on the left piece. The right piece, there is an area where he's exploring luster glaze in with the matte glaze and then some gold luster. What else do we know about him? He lives and works in the town he grew up in Louisiana.
Yep. And next we have Ashlyn Pope, who I mentioned also came to Minneapolis, and it was a delight to have her here. Ashlyn Pope grew up in New Jersey, in Morristown, and discovered around the age of 10 that she is Gullah. And that was so important for her to learn about her ancestry and her heritage. And there's something important to know. I was in South Carolina and I took my students each semester to St. Helena Island, and we would meet with Queen Kuet. And it's clear I'm not Gullah. I'm not part of that community, but I loved learning about it and made friends with a sweetgrass basket maker. And what I learned going there is you can use the sweetgrass basket technique, but that does not mean you've made a sweetgrass basket. You need to call it something else. You can only be Gullah. And it can only be passed down to you from your maternal side of your family. Well, Ashlyn was missing that. And in order to find that, she began incorporating that in her work. So you see on these cups on the left, which have to have something to hold them up, which is that sweetgrass basket, that small start of the basket, because she wants them to be upheld by that heritage, by that culture. So they can't stand on their own. They need to be connected to that to feel fully upright. And so I am just absolutely floored that she's able to articulate this sweetgrass in clay and express that and make her own connection within the work. And the cup on the left, why she was talking about Black bodies and clay and metaphor, her clay is something she calculated and wanted to be very specific that would reflect skin color, Black skin color, and celebrate it. And so when she was in school, she had a friend who was able to help her get just the right color that she was looking for. And she speaks about that and how important it is to her. And she's also etching cotton onto the cups. Her grandmother, still living, worked up until she was 18 as a sharecropper, picking cotton in the fields, and told her about that and what her hands would look like, when she was done. And I want to end by reading a quote about her clay body and what she was looking for. I wanted a rich chocolate brown clay body that would personify Black bodies in the most beautiful way. A clay body with a vitreous surface, similar to earthenware. By using brown clay, I am invoking the skin of Black bodies. So my clay body is central in the work. The clay body I use can reflect the range of Black bodies, not just one tone, but embraces all the tones in our culture. We call clay a clay body, so there is no way to separate the body from the clay.
Before we leave, let's just make sure that our audience really understands that those little basket forms are clay. You did say that, but let's just go back to that. And not only are they clay, they are composed of thin straws of clay that she then, just as the sweetgrass baskets were produced.
Yep.
And here he is, Mr. James Watkins.
Similar to David McDonald.
Yes, another older maker. You can see here that this piece he is making is essentially a smaller piece inside a larger piece. He's making what is called a double-walled piece. And I want to read a quote from him. During his graduate studies, he started keeping journals. One night, I had a lucid dream that I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, walking through the plaza. I looked in the window of the gallery and saw my pots, but they were double-walled. Then I touched one of the pots, and examining the pot, I figured out how it was made. Then this is my words, or our words, as he continued to develop these large cauldron forms, they moved in the direction of sculptural objects, which is what you're looking at, a non-functional, functional object. He grew up with his mother and grandmother on a farm, doing their laundry in cauldrons. So a lot of his pieces reference that form. Here he's taken it one step beyond. They get these very elaborate handles that are sometimes serpent related. This one is a particularly brilliant luster glaze. How was this fired, Chotsani?
Well, he has the book with Paul Andrew Wanless, who is also in the book. They co-authored Alternative Firing Methods. And every time I look in that book, I just don't get how they figured all that out. It's the Sager firing. They know exactly how the sulfurs work. And it's like magic. So they're primarily saggar-fired, alternate, not relying on the electric kiln in that way, to develop these metallic surfaces, especially you see on the lower left corner, that kind of flashing and all the different materials that are used to create these different carbonaceous and poisonous atmospheres that produce these beautiful surfaces.
So that's our story.
Yeah, that puts us at time. We were trying to be very mindful of time. So that's hard to do when you can't see.
And it's a much longer story,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
which you can read and see in the book. You've seen the cover of the book, but for instance, here is the James Watkins spread, or one of them. So you can see there are lots more wonderful pieces to be seen. Your turn.
Oh yes, with our time, that's what we had. If I think, Margaret, is this the time where we do Q&A, or do we just fill space? What do we do now?
We can do Q&A now, and if people have questions, put them in the chat. And I want to start with a question. Because there are lots and lots of under-recognized artists, how did you limit this to just the 30-some that are in this book?
Well, one was the publisher, gave a number.
The publisher said 40. And there are actually 40 human beings in this book. It's just that two of them are a set. Rosa Ann Winton, who you just saw, and
Kyle
then
and
we've
Kelly.
got a set of twins, two men who work side by side on their work.
Yeah, and I think just finding people, following through, starting this in the pandemic, how do you make genuine connections? So we had to rely on some people, that we had already knew. And I think it kind of just worked itself out. And I think what really drove it is what Donald has been mentioning, being very intentional about the diversity of people, not doing it where it's only academics or it's only studio potters, only people who have certain kind of background to get them to be, in order to be recognized or featured. So there were just long discussions about that. And I don't know, I can't speak for Donald, but for me, it felt like it was just moving and figuring itself out in terms of when people responded, if we could get in touch with people and things like that. But we hope it's not the only book.
And people we had spoken to suggested people we might want to speak to. And that gave us a number of the people in this book are academics. So they have,
Students.
Generations of students. And they would say, that's how we got the Phelps twins. I think Bobby Scroggins said,
yep,
you've got to talk to the Phelps. So you go talk to the Phelps. And that range of experience, one of the people who we talked to was, a person not in the book, who happens to be one of the people at this talk, when she saw the book, commented on the fact that it spanned the range of possibilities age-wise, developmentally wise, in terms of their skills, and that we had put them all in alphabetical order rather than creating, and that was important to both of us, that there was not going to be a hierarchy. The potters and the clay sculptors, they're all A, B, C. Did that help?
Yes, I want to recommend something to all the people that haven't looked at your book, because, and this is, I'm not just saying this lightly, when it arrived, of course, I didn't know, I looked at the Northern Clay Center's show before I actually got my own copy of the book. But I didn't realize, at first I thought it might be the kind of book that when I wanted to look up some contemporary American, Black ceramic artists. I'd use it as a reference tool. But when it actually arrived, I only knew a few of the artists in the book, that I was fascinated by each entry, that the stories stand by themselves. The images are wonderful, both in the artwork and the people, but the actual writings in the book are fantastic. They're all different. They're all engaging. And I'd encourage people who think they're going to buy a reference book, you can use it for that, but you're actually going to want to sit down and enjoy it. So I congratulate you both on the book, and it's great. So are there questions?
Yeah, there are a few.
Thank you, Margaret.
And actually, I think you've already answered the first question. It starts with a comment, wonderful presentation, and then goes on to ask about how you identified the artists and what was the pool you selected from, and what brought you to organizing the material in this format as opposed to dealing with specific issues or where common ground issues in their content. So I think you've pretty much answered that question.
Well, I'll say, can you repeat that part about the issues thing?
The part that I didn't read very well.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, what was the pool you selected from, and what brought you to organize the material in this format as opposed to dealing with specific issues? Or were there common ground issues in their content?
No, I think all the time, Donald, I know I can speak for Donald. It's what pretty much Rich Brown said. It was about people. People first, not issues. I mean, yeah, the issue was that there isn't this type of a book. But then once you get past that, it was the artist, the person first. And then their stories are what created that create that question, how they came together. The artist breathed life into that way the book unfolds.
I would like to jump back to Margaret's comment about the writing. One of the things you will find when you read this book is probably 80% of the words in the book are the words of the makers that came from our conversations with them. We really wanted it to be their stories. So if they had issues about being a Black person trying to make a life as an artist, they got to say it. We weren't going to say that for them. That good? That's right.
I see Victoria Cooper has a question. Are there any early African-American dinnerware makers who so profoundly influenced American design culture? I'd say yes. That's actually in our first chapter. If you were to check out the Drayton Hall and the chapter with that focuses on Edgefield, South Carolina. But I think Doyle Lane.
Yeah, most of his work was functional tableware.
And it is so popular right now. You know, it's like a reverse influence. It's like a latent influence. I would definitely position Doyle Lane. I know it's not specifically dinnerware, but design culture, I think we can look at his work. Because he was making around the same time as the big California explosion with Vulcus and why am I blanking? Nagel, Ron Nagel, right? No.
Ron Nagel, but
yeah, and Stephen DeStabler, all that time, that big California, and now he's having his moment. What did you say? You would go look at his work, Donald, and see what it was selling for. Donald was intent on buying.
Thousands of dollars. And I think in a desperate move, at one point, he made beads. He was a glaze master, just incredible glaze chemist.
Somebody wants to know where a picture of Doyle Lane is. They want to see his image. Do you have a picture of the artist?
In the book. Oh, no, there isn't a picture of him there. Very little is known about his life. He apparently lived very quietly, did his thing, and then tried to sell his work, but he was not bouncing around the social scene.
We did use Studio Powder as a reference, and I know in their archives,
There is an image of him.
yeah,
there.
on clay makers in Los Angeles. I'm pretty sure there's an image of him. But again, it's not like the portrait, you know what I mean? It's just it's different than I think we would envision, like the way we showed these images of the contemporary makers.
So the Ann Arbor District Library, our hosts have been doing what libraries do. If you go into the chat, they've posted some links for information on Chloe Spear, Drayton Hall, and Doyle Lane.
Wonderful.
Um,
Thank you.
Good library.
Well, do your research on your own.
But one way to do research is to ask a librarian. Another question that came up is, where should we go to buy this book?
Unfortunately, Amazon. Fortunately,
Or-
unfortunately.
Well, there are a number of online places to buy it. I would like you to go to your neighborhood bookstore.
Yep.
Your local bookstore and buy it there. And
Yeah,
if they don't have it, tell them you want a copy and that they should buy 10 copies for other people to buy.
And can't
But-
they buy it through Schiffer also?
They
Yeah.
can.
Yep.
Schiffer, Barnes and Noble,
Yep,
Amazon.
thrift books. Yeah, I mean, usually Amazon's the first choice in the path of least resistance for all of our shopping. And Donald makes a very good point. The New York Historical Society has it. The gallery Donald was owning partner in Pinch has books.
Has it in
You get that
Northampton,
online?
yes.
Pinch.
Yeah, and you can buy it online.
Are there other questions?
And it turns out we keep finding places. You know, we're not the salespeople, so it's not our job to sell books, but we're finding out that booksellers all over the place are selling it. Kind of fun.
So there's
And now that Margaret has given it that incredible pitch, we're going to recommend her to Schiffer as a marketer.
I've done a couple books with Schiffer and they aren't going to take me.
Thank you, Martha. And I'm looking at the Q&A. And thank you, Steve.
Any other questions?
I think we've pretty much gone through all of the questions. There is a
Somebody just asked to
Someone
show
just
the
said
book
Doyle
again.
Lane's selling for 10K plus.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Wow. Just the tiny pots. The little
Wow.
Phillies, yeah.
Good for him. Well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank you both for a fantastic presentation. Maybe you'll be doing volume 2 and we'll have you come back. Anyway,
Well, thank you for letting us do
thank you
this.
so much.
Thank you for having us. Everybody, thank you for taking the time to attend and listen.
All these names on my screen.
Thank you, Margaret, Matt. There's an Emily somewhere involved.
James, Donna.
Anyway, thank you all very much and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you. Oh, Sandra was there.